Welcome back to Time to Talk. My name is Nigel Christopher, and we're talking to the British Democrats. Today's programme is all about nationalism, and I'd like to welcome Steve to the programme. I thought a very good start to the programme, Steve, would actually be to define what does the word nationalism actually mean? And the definition being identification with one's own nation and support for its interests. What I'd like to know, Steve, is why did you take an interest in nationalism?
Well, hello, Nigel. Thank you for inviting me along. My interest was initially instinctive and emotional rather than any sort of thought-out process. I joined nationalism when I was 15. At the time, there was no actual thought process, but in retrospect, as you learn things over the years, nationalism means to me what it says, and it comes from the Latin word natio, which means tribes. So it means my tribe. In a defined area, i.e. a territory, the sovereign territory of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and also a culture and a socio-economic system that suits us. I don't wish for imperialism or persecution or hatred towards anyone, just for the wish that my tribe in a defined area that is sovereign and also of a system that benefits us, keeps us going into the future. So that's my very simplistic interpretation of nationalism.
So, from a political point of view, why do you feel nationalism is important?
One of the horrors of this world would be a global state, a one world state, because ultimately it would be a tyranny. It would evolve into that because the more you give people power, the more they centralize it and the more they abuse it. It would also be a techno slave state because with technology now that keeps tabs on people and surveillance and that kind of thing. So there'd be no escape from it. So I think the ultimate horror would be a global state, which would be a global tyranny. Nationalism breaks all that down. Nationalism gives people a real sense of freedom because of the decentralization of political and economic power, because of the cultural choice that comes from an ethno state, and also where possible private sovereignty from private property. Whereas a one world state would have a tiny, tiny cabal at the top with some mandarins underneath doing their work, and 99% of us would have utterly miserable and horrific lives.
So, during your research, Steve, pertaining nationalism, what have you actually discovered, whether it be advantages or disadvantages?
People get the wrong idea of nationalism. They always link it with imperialism. They think that once you're a certain size and a certain strength, you're going to conquer. That is the case. Obviously, that Rome started out as a little village on the River Tiber, then ended up as the Roman Empire. That does happen, of course. But I think our nationalism can be contained just to what Britain is and our relations with the world, principally sort of Western Europe and the Atlantic. So I don't think we go down the imperialist route. I think it'd be beneficial for our people because if you look about Britain over the last 40 years, you see a group of people, I'm talking about the natives, who are suffering from mass depression. They're utterly miserable inside. They may cheer at a football match or have a few pints down the pub or celebrate the birth of a child, that kind of thing. But on the whole, it's a people who've got cloud and gloom written all over them. I think nationalism will revive their spirits. And also with our economic policies, we can improve the standard of living and make sure that work is enjoyable and life is lived to the whole.
Now, I've noticed in politics today and probably over the last few decades that for some reason we don't seem to focus in the United Kingdom on what matters the people who are either born here or those people who actually have a lawful right to be here. Why do you think other political parties are so disinterested for what actually happens in the United Kingdom?
The thing is with the political system, once upon a time, they did have links to ordinary people, and you had outstanding personalities in Parliament, such as Enoch Powell, and on the left side, Tony Benn or Michael Foot. And people who were intelligent, they lived through the Second World War, they understand ordinary problems. What we have now is an elite who live in a bubble. They're extremely well paid through politics and through journalism and through non-executive directorships. And they've literally, almost like a negative form of the Olympians from ancient Greek mythology, they've broken away, formed their own bubble, and the rest of us are irrelevant to them. As Jonathan Bowden used to say, we're just a puddle that they step over. So they don't connect with us on one level. And from an ideological point of view, you've got three strands. You've got globalism, which wants the one world state and is pushing towards that. You've got a system of plutocracy where it literally is about making money, regardless of what it does to the individual cultures of ethnic nation states. And you've also got a disease known as liberalism, which is an inability to work with nature, to work with sociobiology, to work with common sense or gut instinct. So you put all those things together, the political class have no interest in us whatsoever, and quite frankly, they wish that we would just shut up and go away.
What actually worries me most of all, particularly at the moment, Steve, is I think that in the United Kingdom, we tend to take democracy for granted. And I've noticed, for example, when religion takes over, for example, in Iran, the religious fanatics get in, they take over the country, but there's no way back. Do you actually fear as a nationalist that we could actually lose democracy unless we start focusing more on nationalism?
Yeah, I mean, the certain religions would be a threat to that democracy because they would be absolutists and their faith is the only thing that's important. But I think that democracy is probably being lost more through the globalism rather than the religion of a particular group of people. That really is the problem because power seems to disappear. If it's not in Parliament, then it goes to Europe, then it goes to the United Nations or to NATO and so on. That's the real threat to democracy is that power is disappearing over the hills. No one can keep control of it. No one can keep in touch of it. It's so far away, there's no response from it. Certainly, yes, certain religions, even political ideologies, like if there was a revival of communism, would be a threat to democracy. But overall, I would say it's globalism and the plutocratic infrastructure underneath it, which are a threat to democracy because they're taking away and stripping away all amounts of power, even from ordinary people like ourselves.
I actually worry so much about the United Kingdom and the way politics is actually going at the moment, Steve, because I get the feeling that the majority of political parties, the main ones, Liberal, Labour, Conservatives, they seem so focused on what's happening outside the UK as opposed to what's actually happening inside the UK. What do you think they need to do politically to start focusing on what happens in our country rather than what's happening abroad?
I don't think they will because I don't think any of the major parties contain any of the old constituent elements that used to be there. For example, old Labour was concerned about working class people, trade unions, cloth cap, the cooperative societies, that kind of thing. The old Tories, apart from an instinctive patriotism, also had the one nation feeling that, yes, we might not like working class men in our private clubs in Westminster, but we should look after people. Even the old Liberals had radical ideas that were quite decent in terms of decentralisation. But now it's just a uni party. They all believe in the one world vision. They're all in favour of laissez faire capitalism. They all also believe that all human nature is determined by nurture as opposed to nature. So they're much of a muchness. I don't think they'll ever recover. You saw something interesting last week with George Galloway getting elected, a controversial character, certainly. But he represented to some extent the old Labour, and that's why some of the people voted for that, not just because of recent issues or issues in the Middle East. A lot of people wanted old Labour in the way that a lot of middle class people in Surrey and Hampshire might want old Tories back. So I think there will come a point when the uni party will literally be ignored and people will start seeking alternatives. And certainly one of those alternatives will be the British nationalism of the British Democratic Party.
Okay, well, on a local level, how do you feel that the British Democrats can really make a difference?
We're doing quite well at this because it's only the last couple of years we've sort of really sort of dug into the idea of community-based nationalist politics and sinking roots. We've got only a handful of parish councillors, and that is the lowest level of that you can get elected to in this country. But even then, good work is being done, such as in Basildon with Chris, and in Maidstone with Lawrence. And a lot of it is literally talking to people on the door. You're not doing it through social media, via a text message or an email. You're literally face to face and you're saying, look, what can I do to help you with your problems? It could be housing, it could be education for your children, it could be social services for your parents. What's the environment down here like around here? Sometimes nationalists have had a little clean up in the area to show them what we're capable of doing. So we're laying foundations at the very, very bottom level of political activity. And then after that, we can move back into the area of district councils. And eventually, hopefully, one day, if we had the fortune to get hold of a local authority, even a small one, we show what we can actually do with our policies.
So, Steve, what I'd also like to know is that you've got some fine pedigree at the British Democrats. Can you give me some examples of the leadership that you have and the experience they have as well?
Well, of course, you've got Andrew Bronze, whose politics goes back to the 1960s. Andrew Bronze is a very friendly, sort of very relaxed character, supreme intellect. That's why he was a lecturer at Harrogate University for so long. You've only got to peruse any of his articles online or through old magazines to see what a clever man he is. So he's obviously a class. There is, of course, Dr. Jim Luthwaite, again, excellent at debating, knows his subject. He never pauses. He never gets flustered for an answer. Jim is a very talented individual. Probably the central motor of the British Democrats is Mike Jones. He's like if you're into football, he's like that central midfield player who never stops. He just goes on and on and on. He has tremendous energy. He's always buoyant. He's always optimistic, never miserable. He takes on a great deal of responsibility. So he is a key central component in the British Democrats. And I'd probably also like to praise other executive colleagues. Peter Finch up in Norfolk, thoroughly good bloke. Lawrence, again, Lawrence Rustum, similar to Mike, doesn't stop working, always optimistic, always buoyant. We can always go forward. Chris Bateman in Basildon, apart from having a wonderful sense of humour, is also a delight to be with. Again, that kind of person, positive, upbeat. Yeah, we can win this one, no problem. So that's just some of my colleagues. And they're an absolute, having known a lot of political people over 40 years, they're an absolute joy to work with. And as I said, it's always on an upbeat note. Always going forward, never looking back, never being miserable, and never giving in.
Steve, thank you very much indeed for the interview. I'm sure the British Democrats have a lot to offer in the near future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your time. Take good care, Nigel. Goodbye.